Great, thank you, Sunny. Let's see. I'm just going to test. Can you see my screen? Is that working? Okay, great. I'm going to stop sharing while people arrive, just so we all can see each other. Actually, nope, I'm not, because it has good instructions on it. I apologize. Let's see if I can make that full screen. Okay, great. So we'll give everyone just a couple minutes to arrive. If you don't mind introducing yourself in the chat while we're doing that. And if you have a favorite summertime activity on the island, please let us know what it is.
Amy, I just have a question. Is this in the big chat down below, which seems to be everybody, or do we have our own little chat within group one?
Oh, we should have our own little chat.
I'm not sure.
But
so maybe it is specific to the group that you've chosen, I guess.
I think so. Yeah, I think it is. I think it just carried over from what was in the prior chat stayed, but now I think we're in our own.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we got lots of Smith's Point. And
I have to apologize. I got another Zoom going on, believe it or not. So I'll come back if you need my vote. We spoke about this earlier today, Katie, okay? I'm sorry.
Okay. Let's see if I can see how many people we are here. Looks like we've got a pretty good group.
Who's chairing the Madaket work group?
That's going to be me. I was just about to introduce myself.
Amy, I'd like permission to record this, and I asked Trevor, but I haven't heard.
It's actually
I'm in a breakout room just around Madaket.
So we are recording.
I can join in.
And I don't know, Sunny, do you know exactly if those will be made available, if the actual recordings will be made available for folks?
Yeah, I think so. I think everything will be. I'll check in with Trevor to see how you'll get access from.
There was like
let me ask.
people in the big room.
So maybe just a couple items. First, if you are not talking to the people on this screen, if you can mute yourself, that will be extremely helpful. And then I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and I'll introduce kind of what we'll be doing here in the work in this group. And then also just a few kind of outline of sort of rules of the road, sort of what, you know, how we're going to try to do this together. So my name is Amy Whitesides. I am the Director of Resiliency at STOS. We're the landscape architecture consultants for the Arcadis team. And I'm being helped out today with Sunny, by Sunny. So if folks could please mute themselves, that would be really great, really helpful. Sunny, sorry, Sunny, I think if you could just introduce yourself again.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Sunny. I work with Amy at STOS Landscape Urbanism. And Ron, to answer your question, they will be posted on the town's website, and we'll also email a link to all the recordings.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. So just a couple of quick sort of business items before we get going. We'll be doing 2 things, possibly 3, within this little mini workshop. We'll be looking at preliminary resiliency strategies in both downtown and Madaket. We'll start with Madaket since that's the kind of primary area of interest for you all, assuming since you've selected this group. And then we'll move to downtown. So we'll kind of split our time, 50% of our time. And then if we finish with that and we have some time, we can go to a 3rd location of your choosing. It's pretty tight, so we don't anticipate that, but we can jump to one of those should we all have complete consensus on what the right approach is here. So quick kind of set of ground rules and just, kind of guidelines of how to make this really be a successful chat. So first off is that we really do want to acknowledge everyone's voice and everyone's time. So, if you are someone who's apt or prone to kind of speaking frequently, please, just take a back seat occasionally and make sure that if other people have something to say, you're giving them that opportunity. Please also speak from your own experience. That's critical. It's kind of part of why we're here. We really want to know what Nantucket means to you and what types of trade-offs or approaches are going to be acceptable for you, or what challenges we might have to, we may not have foreseen yet, that might be involved. And then if there are several group members with things to share, we'll rely more heavily on the raise hand function. So, we can kind of take that as it comes, but if a lot of people are trying to talk, we'll just use that raise hand function. You should be able to see it down in the area where you picked your breakout group. You should see the raise hand function down there if you haven't used it before. And Sunny or I will call on you. And then if you are not already and you are able, please consider turning your camera on. It looks like many of you already have. If at any point in time you would like to leave this breakout room and return to the main room, you can click on the return to the main session. And then if you do need to leave the meeting entirely, there's just a click leave meeting button. So we'll hate to see you go, but we understand everyone's got a lot going on in their lives. So a couple, maybe before I jump to that, a couple of just quick kind of assumptions or disclaimers, sort of what to expect in this breakout. We, first, as Trevor mentioned, we'll consider some of the key resilience issues in the area. And we'll explore sort of a preliminary resilience strategy that combines options to address these issues. These, they are preliminary and they're composed of a series of approaches that we imagine could be implemented over the next 5 to 10 years. They are one feasible way resilience could be achieved in this study area. And this is based on, the evaluation of risk that Trevor has gone through with you, and the technical expertise that Arcadis and the team brings around implementation, as well as our understanding of how, we might prioritize resources. And that's one of the things that we want to be hearing from you. So these are not final in any way. We'll be taking the feedback around priorities and trade-offs that you provide to us tonight, and working with those to integrate that information into the technical information that we've already been doing. Any of these ideas need further refinement, so that's another part of what we will be working on, and would go through a number of steps, including design, permitting, construction, further public conversation, before anything is being implemented. So, please understand that this is this is an early part of that conversation before anything is actually, happening, right? We won't have time to discuss every possible option. So, we do want to hear from you throughout this session and understand if we're missing something, that you think would be really critical for us to further consider as we move ahead. We also will talk through some of what we understand to be key benefits and trade-offs for each of these strategies and explore kind of potential adaptation pathways to achieve resilience in the area. So again, the trade-offs and what is acceptable or not is a really important piece, and how we can try to maximize the efficacy and enthusiasm around what the final recommendations are. Any questions before I move on? Any questions just on format and what we're going to cover, anything that I've just said? Great, okay, doesn't look like it. Perfect, so in Madaket, the way first approach to Madaket is that this is what we're calling an adapt strategy. Trevor just ran through with you what each of the different, protect, adapt terms that we're applying throughout these, kind of what they mean. So here we have an adapt strategy, which prioritizes extending the useful life of critical infrastructure in the area, maintaining access to private properties and water access points off of Madaket Road, and then enhancement of marsh habitats and nature-based erosion management to reduce the risks of flooding and erosion. Some of the key issues that we understand to be kind of priority here are, and shown in this image, you can see in the kind of orange color is what we understand to be the 1% flood extent in roughly 2070. So some of the key issues around that time are loss of critical access roadways. So you can see that kind of in these two purple, so Madaket Road and the Ames Bridge. Loss of public access points, so the marina, impacts to the marina, both to the north and south, erosion on the coastline, and then throughout the area, damage and disruption to private residences, and then within the kind of harbor here, loss of eelgrass habitat. Again, if there are resilience issues you think we're missing here, just hang on to that feedback for now, and we'll discuss those comments in the framework as we get into it. So what is our resilience framework here? So to address each of the issues identified on the previous slide, we've created this kind of preliminary idea that, as you can see on the slide, has sort of different types of approaches that might be suggested in different areas, depending on the issue to be addressed. So within each of the shaded zones, a different approach may be applied. So for example, yellow here is indicating nature-based erosion management. There's more than one way of going about that. We aren't yet indicating exactly how, but rather what is the kind of goal for that area. So you can see here, we have nature-based erosion management in the yellow along the shorelines, areas kind of in green around the marshes where habitat protection and enhancement will be kind of prioritized. And then at the marina and the docks, the idea of adapting water access to ensure continued access to those routes. And then in the lighter purple, kind of resilient buildings and reduced density. And then you can see this kind of slightly darker purple line, the idea of a kind of resilient corridor, like a resilient transportation corridor. Part of the reason behind this is that maintaining access to the area is a real priority within this preliminary strategy. To do this, we're suggesting elevating Madaket Road to create this resilient corridor. By elevating Madaket Road, emergency access to the area can be maintained into the future. And when the road is elevated, new or modified culverts are suggested to maintain the natural flow of water in the area, especially between the ponds. Through this strategy, the town will therefore maintain access to Madaket. However, in order for the area to really be resilient, homeowners will need to take action. So within the purple areas that I mentioned, homeowners and business owners will be responsible for adapting their own properties. This could include a number of things, from elevation to wet proofing or even relocating. Each property has their own risk tolerance. So, that may not look the same for everyone. Some property owners are more willing to accept risk than others and can decide when and how it's kind of most appropriate to reduce their risk. There may be also means, or it may be appropriate to reduce density through policy and programs. Reducing density in Madaket could mean a number of things, including changes to zoning regulations for future development, increases in setbacks for buildings and other structures, and acquisition or relocation of buildings, just as examples of what types of things have happened in other places or what that might mean. Building scale adaptations can include things like elevating the structure, wet flood proofing, elevating critical mechanical systems, deployable flood walls, as in some ways, just purchasing flood insurance, which some people don't have, reducing permeable paving on the property to allow for infiltration, and installing pumps. There's a whole host of those kinds of things, which also, as part of the project, there will also be a little bit of a kind of guide for those types of homeowner strategies. Habitat protection and enhancement is really here. One of the things we think is really critical is about how we protect and enhance habitats that have several benefits. This will include flood and erosion risks that support fish and shellfish populations. So in particular here, we understand the eelgrass in Madaket Harbor is a really critical asset. So we're thinking about what are the ways in which the damage to that can be reduced through these strategies. That it might include changes to make room for natural migration of resources, sediment enhancements to enable wetlands to kind of keep up with sea level rise, or development limits to reduce encroachment on wetlands. And then possibly also shoreline stabilization to reduce erosion impacts, in particular in the areas in yellow that I'm showing here on this map. So I want to get into a little bit more detail in the next slide, but before I do that, I think just a kind of quick discussion question for you all, and Sunny will be taking some notes here for us. If we could only address one of the resilience issues in this area, which would you prioritize? And feel free to just raise hands or drop things in the chat, whatever.
Hi, Amy, this is Sarah.
Great. Hi,
so
Sarah.
as an ecologist, I feel like I want to say nature-based solutions and habitat protection, but putting my hat on for the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, our kind of priority is the community access. So I think that if we had one choice, which I hope we don't have one choice, would be the roadways, elevating the roadways, the bridges were necessary, and just making sure that there's that emergency access to all the homes there. And obviously Madaket Road is the main lifeline. And I don't know if there's been a discussion of side roads. I know in lots of this general area, there's private roads, and obviously those are a different entity for the town to consider. But are there guidelines in other ways? And Lisa, I don't know if the design guidelines included anything about like private roadways or driveways and things like that. So yes, the road itself might be accessible, the main road, but how do we get to that main road kind of thing? I'm interested to hear more about that.
Amy, I might just add, Sarah, to your point, surfaces were addressed. Materials are always a big issue, you know, permeable, non-permeable. So encouraging more permeable approaches is in the guidelines. Encourage more nature-based, particularly looking at things that might be a combination of, you know, berms, grassy landscaped areas that can absorb more water versus just going to a hardening approach. Specific to roads, it's really going to come down to materials again, I think, and some of the other solutions I think are being discussed for downtown that may also be issues of elevation of roads, which are structural projects, may or may not be within the 5 to 10 year period, but certainly an adaptation option.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'll see this even more so when we talk about downtown, but it's also true with Madaket Road. You know, there are, in some areas, it would require raising the road, depending on how high it's raised, would impact adjacent properties or would impact the on and off ramps. And so there would need to be further study to understand, you know, what exactly each of those impacts are, and to then continue to kind of delve into, are those acceptable, you know, trade-offs, and are we, for example, raising the road to stay out of mean high water at high tide on a regular basis in 2070, or any flooding at all? You know, those are the types of trade-offs that we may need to consider. So it looks like I'm seeing a lot about resilient bridges and roadways. So you have access as being kind of maybe the primary priority, and then pretty closely followed by a lot of comments around some of the nature-based solutions and erosion management, you know, ensuring the kind of ecological value of the area.
Amy, might I speak?
Yes, please.
This is Ron Russo. Happily for everybody here, I don't think that your circumstances as dire as mine. I've owned my cottage, which at the end past Fred Rogers, the Crooked House. It's the last house on the left, and I don't know how long I'll be there. So all of these, you're obviously trying to deal with the largest number of residents, which makes a lot of sense, but a road won't help me if I don't have a house. And the bottom line may be that it's too late for the folks out at Smith's Point. I know I see my friend Tom Erickson is here as well. I've been hearing about this nature-based erosion management. The Madaket Association, the Smiths Point Association, has been putting in snow fences or sand fences, and that's been helpful. But frankly, when I bought my house in 1984, you couldn't see the ocean. And in 2007, the ocean hit us and I had to move back to the end of my property. So I'm at the wall now, and we've had wonderful time from 2007. There has been a good deal of accretion out there, as anybody who's been out there can see, but this winter was not kind to us. And so I lost about half the beach. And, you know, I pray that I'll be able to go there with my grandchildren for years to come. But my bottom line is that as important as everything is that you're speaking of, there is really nothing more important from my point of view. And I may be a very, very small minority of people who are in this program, is if we don't get some nature-based erosion management, whatever that is, I probably won't be on this Zoom call next year. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I really appreciate it. I think you covered a lot of the key issues in Madaket, you know, and that I think certainly the question of erosion management is one throughout the island, right? That is in different areas really critical. So, and each area is slightly different in terms of what is feasible. But this maybe leads to a second question that I have for everyone, which is the erosion management and a number of the types of strategies we're talking about here, as I mentioned earlier, they are an adapt strategy. And just given the way in which flooding happens here and the nature of the area, we think that adapt is probably the most appropriate strategy for this area, but we do want to hear from you. Should we be thinking about other kinds of options, you know, protect, retreat? Does adapt make sense to you? Knowing that, I think, in Ron, in the case that you just made, adapt may mean slowing erosion. You know, it's not a full protection scenario, right? And we don't know exactly, as you know, that there are accretion and erosion cycles, right? And so it's a little bit hard to predict. And so that's maybe, would love to hear from everyone, you know, does adapt make sense here in the context of everything we're talking about? Should we be thinking about other means?
Amy, I think it does make sense, Amy. I don't want to speak over anybody. I think it does make sense. The cycles are unpredictable, and you know you can't stop the ocean. I mean, that's kind of the umbrella over all of this. All you can do is try to become more resilient, as we're saying. But the issue for us at the point is a bit more dramatic, and I'm not sure that there's anything to be done at this point.
So I'd like to chime in as another Smith Point homeowner. I absolutely agree with the situation that Ron's in. Most of us are somewhat in that situation, depending on how close we are. But it's not just our homes. I mean, I feel really strongly that, you know, we scallop in the fall there. So do many other people in the town. And that point is one bad storm away from cutting off access to people who go to Tuckernuck using the Jackson Point launch, people who go walking on the beach, the birders that are out there, the scallopers, the fishermen. It's not just, and the people who go see the sunset. I mean, obviously as homeowners, we're very concerned about our own property, but as just a person who's, you know, grown up in Massachusetts and who realizes what a precious resource this is, we're one storm away from a really catastrophic cutoff of access for everybody in Nantucket to this very unique part of the island. It's one of the parts of the island that's not built up and has a lot of water access for kayaking and fishing and shelling. And I just think it would be a tragedy if we didn't try to do something to slow the erosion down in an environmentally sensitive way. Other parts of Massachusetts do things like plant beach grass when we have a bad winter storm like we just had. They do some, you know, modified beach renourishment in areas where it's scoured because we had one part of the beach is damaged. So, you know, I don't see that level of urgency happening when there are some very low tech solutions like planting beach grass, planting Rosa rugosa, and maybe doing a little bit of beach nourishment. I watch the town dig out Mass Ave every year and take the sand away instead of just dumping it back on the other side of the dune. So there's just so many little things that we could be doing to slow erosion. I think we all know we can't stop it, but to do nothing doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for the entire island, not just the homeowners that are out there.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, I just really want to appreciate what you just were saying, Susan, because I was thinking about, I don't live in Madaket, but I work in the Madaket area. And I think that Just as you were saying, I was thinking about all the commercial fisheries and the recreational fisheries and just all the things that Madaket Harbor represents. So I think you have it as two separate things, the nature-based erosion management and the habitat protection and enhancement. But I think in some cases, in some parts of Madaket, those two things can go very much hand in hand. Obviously, it's really dependent on where the major erosion is. But I think because it's such a good starting point in Madaket with all the eelgrass and Hither Creek area. And, you know, I think that that's just a really natural system to work with those nature-based solutions, as well as the nature-based erosion management. One thing I was going to also add was I know, Amy, that you guys know a lot about, you know, the history of things that have happened, but just looking at what happened with the stilt house and the storm that really, the initial storm and the subsequent storms that inundated that area, the response not only from the Madaket community, but the whole island, I think is really emblematic of what Susan is saying about one bad storm really just like cutting off access to the area will just affect that cultural heritage and the feeling of people. I mean, people are really like have strong feelings about that. But then the response to that of the beach grass planting and native plants that have been planted, and that's a combined effort between multiple, like the town, the Conservation Foundation, Mass Audubon. I think Sam might be on this section too. I think is a really emblematic of what the community can do when the organizations come together as well. So I think that's a great example of some of what can happen in some of those areas. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was involved with that the beach grass project. And it was so hard to get that done. It was so hard we had to get a grant from an outside organization and the town match, where we were very appreciative of. We finally got the grass in. We had a big group of people. I was out there planting, but it shouldn't have been that hard. It should have happened right away when the damage happened, instead of a group of homeowners and conservation people getting together and applying for the grant and doing that. That's not the right way to approach this. We need to be approaching it both from a local government and homeowners and conservation groups all working together. It was incredibly hard to get that done. And that was just one tiny, you know, dune that we protected, right? So it's a great start, but we can't, it's not sustainable to do it the way we did it.
Just one super small thing. Susan said an outside group, kind of an outside group of sorts. It wasn't a town group, but it was highly localized to Madaket. It was the Madaket Conservation Association that gave half the grant money for that,
right?
That planting. And there was, yeah, it could have happened sooner. What really kicked us with that one was COVID. Killed it by about a year.
Yeah, so yeah, this is really helpful. And I think the thing that I'm hearing, I think pretty loud and clear, is certainly that access is really critical, but that is the slowing of the erosion and retaining the ecological resources that we've, you know, kind of called out here it's right behind it. You know, they go hand in hand. They are part of why the access is critical, right? Not just, it's not just about the homes, while those are very important. You know, it is about so many of the kind of tremendous resources that this area provides. And I appreciate also that I am hearing, you know, even from people who stand to lose a lot in the, you know, possible future scenario, that adapt makes sense, that, you know, we're seeing that. So, just a quick, someone had asked a question just about whether adapt means reducing density and designing resilient infrastructure. Yes, that's exactly, I may have missed the beginning bit that I went through. You know, adapting is really about, in some ways, slowing processes. So many of the examples and means for erosion control that people have brought up here, that those are ways of adapting. you know, it's not necessarily about hard infrastructure like a wall or something that's keeping water out, right? It's slowing the processes and doing what we can to kind of retain the ability to get to and you know, enjoy or utilize in whatever way it is the key things that we need to use. And a couple of things I also didn't mention earlier that I think are important there are then also the access routes out into the water as well. So, you know, the marina and the dock as other places that might be a little bit more of a kind of hard solution of raising or something like that, but it's not, you know, 100% protecting them from flooding. With that, I want to move maybe to the next slide. This is just a little bit of a zoom in example of, you know, what, and many of you have brought these kinds of things up, so I really appreciate that. This is just taking a look at one smaller part of Madaket and what, you know, what might this mean, and some of those examples. So as I just mentioned, you know, raised roadways and docks, expanded culverts, those might be ways in which we kind of deal with and create this kind of infrastructure corridor. Enhancement of dunes and migration of salt marshes, in particular, looking at areas around Jackson Point and up, you know, in closer to the marina and, you know, in and around the wetlands there. A couple of you also not on this slide, but because a couple of you have mentioned it, I'll just call it out, you know, on the southern shore, things like the sand fence, dune creation, those are all definitely things that fit into this kind of adapt strategy that we're thinking about, you know, how we can do our best to build up and increase the level of accretion, you know, throughout the area while reducing erosion. And then I think Trevor spoke to these earlier about flood proofing or relocating private properties and reducing density may be part of you know, those are more, some of that may be zoning based and some of that may be individuals based. It looks like, Bill, you had your hand up.
Yes, did I successfully unmute myself?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, I'm scores ahead of where I was a minute ago. I just wanted to jump in. First off, back to the raising of the roads. One of the things I see as a potential problem there is the unintended consequences the town will be dealing with when they start getting pushback from homeowners who are property owners who are then receiving the runoff from the roads, you know, that starts to flood their property. And so I can see the town getting bogged down in the legal issues there. We just had an experience of that on Madaket Road, around 306 Madaket Road, where somebody purchased a home and realized they had an in-ground swimming pool, which was really their basement every time it rained. And it was due to the street runoff flooding their property. And so the roads are notoriously not designed for drainage currently. So it's strictly runoff to the side. The other issue, getting back to what Susan and stuff were talking about on Smith's Point, so far, and I'm president of the Madaket Conservation Association, and we have a vested interest in this, obviously. But one of the issues we constantly are facing is the minutia of having to deal with the regs, be it state or local regs, when you try to do something. And so the snow fencing that's been proven to be very, very successful in sand buildup was thanks to the Midnight Fencing Company. It just mysteriously appeared several times over the course of a year or two. The beach grass planting was bogged down in bureaucracy rather than sand. And thanks to Vince for coming on board and putting a lot of effort into that happening. Several years, there's been a beach grass planting that should have happened at the end of Madaket Road that was funded and never did until Vince came along. So we're very thankful for that. And it's funny that one of the slides, I think it might even be the cover slide to your report, is a piece of marsh off of the F Street dock, the Walter Barrett Pier. I'm very familiar with that piece of property because it's mine. And the erosion that's there is exacerbated every day because of mankind and outboards. But the original issue came from an errant fishing captain who lost power and cut a chunk of the marsh out, and then nature took over and has made an actual cut through there. The point being is that was a known issue, and we were unable to protect that or restore it because of all the bureaucracy. So as much as I hope that something comes out of this, I think one of the biggest pushes is to get the town government to pay attention to what is being discovered through this report and to work it into their plans. Last night they were talking about pushing sewer to Madaket without any thought on density issues. We've got a landfill that's desperately close to being one of the areas that's going to flood out. And what do we do with all of that? And those things don't seem to be happening in planning stages. It's certainly not discussed in public meetings. It may very well be discussed in department head meetings, but certainly not with the public. And so it's not until we can break over these hurdles that we're going to have any success in any of these things that we're going to be trying to do. Regretfully so.
Thanks, Bill. I think that there's a lot of great information, and you know, obviously not being part of the town, I can't speak to a number of those, but I do know that the regulatory, you know, when we get into talking about trade-offs, the regulatory environment is certainly one that we need to take into account. You know, there are solutions that are viable, but they may take a long time because of the regulatory process. And so a solution that is, you know, faster and easier to implement may become a better choice just as a result of that. So those are definitely things we're, you know, we're thinking about. I think someone had their hand up physically there, if I'm not mistaken. For some reason, I cannot.
I think we're supposed to start moving to the next subgroup. So sure. We may need to take a final question and then move on to the downtown.
Yeah, let me just quickly, I think we have just a couple minutes. So let me just quickly, I'll just do an overview. I think many of you have already kind of called out a number of these, just to give you a kind of a little bit of our thinking on what are the key trade-offs in this strategy and some of the longer term thinking that we're looking at, and then I'll jump to downtown. So key trade-offs are, you know, one, that private property owners must implement protection for their own homes. However, critical access is maintained to the area. Erosion and flooding won't be stopped, but that allows us to, you know, preserve the experience of the water. And as we mentioned, many of the kind of critical resources like shellfishing, their access to those. And, you know, nature-based approaches are less effective in terms of keeping water out than harder solutions, but do have the potential to enhance ecological value. As we think about long-term adaptation pathways, again, I think this goes to some of what Bill was just mentioning. We may think about strategic removal of infrastructure and private residences from areas subject to erosion and frequent tidal flooding. So may need to evaluate those. Adaptation of this resilient transportation corridor, you know, may need to be adapted higher over time. And so understanding, you know, what is that kind of level we might be comfortable with now and what might be more so later. And then relocation of public boat ramps and access points may need to be thought about in the long term. And one other thing someone had mentioned was kind of the identification of a sand source for Madaket and the rest of the island. I know that's something that we're interested in and looking at, you know, a kind of study, a broader study of what might those sources be. So this slide has a lot of other, you know, just factors to think about. I won't spend the time to run through these. I think many of you are pretty aware of these. So, and these will be available to you should you want to look at those later.
This is Ron Russo. Well, one thing that I would like, one statement that I'd like to come out of this breakout room is that I think I would, and I think that Susan and some of the others who spoke would like to have a better relationship with the town government. Out in Smith's Point, more so than Madaket, but out in Smith's Point, frankly, I feel like we're alone. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like we're getting the support that we need. Tom Erickson is perfectly capable of speaking for himself, but I don't think that he feels that the town is behind us and we're doing what we're doing on our own. And I don't think it ought to be that way because as Susan pointed out, it's a paradise out here. And we'd like to preserve it. We'd like to make sure there are certain critical points where Madaket Roads end and Ames begins, that if that breaks, everything on the other side of Millie's Bridge is alone. We become like Tuckernuck. So I really would like the town to know that we would like to have their support in what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Ron. Okay, for the sake of time, I know we could probably talk about Madaket for quite some time. So I just appreciate all of your insights and apologize. We're gonna keep it a pretty good clip. So downtown. Again, here we want to present just sort of the kind of overview strategy and and here we have a little bit more detail on what some of these might look like. Here, I want to highlight that in downtown, we are thinking of this as a protect approach that is intended to really preserve and enhance quality of life in downtown. Recommends a series of structural approaches that offer flood protection to the neighborhood core and essential facilities. Erosion management in Brant Point and Monomoy also reduce risk while maintaining water views and access. So earlier in the larger group, someone brought out, you know, just the importance of goods and services coming into the island and kind of some of these critical infrastructure pieces. And this is part of, you know, really how we're thinking about downtown. And Alanis, I absolutely hear you. And unfortunately, just given the format, I can't make them any bigger than they are. This is full screen, so I apologize for that. So key resiliency issues downtown. We have, as I just mentioned, you know, flooding at critical infrastructure, in particular, the, you know, steamship area. We have loss of roadways and critical access. That's including emergency access, you know, in and out. We've got damage and disruption of businesses and community assets, as well as damage and disruption of private residences. And then in addition to that, loss of eelgrass habitat in the harbor itself, and then potentially the breach of barrier beaches kind of at the end of Kotu. Those are the kind of, you know, key that we know. There are a few others, but those are sort of the key items. Here again, the kind of preliminary resilience framework in order to address each of the issues identified on the previous slide. We've kind of created this, you know, similar kind of set of ideas here, and as you can see, we have kind of different approaches based on the issue to be addressed. So again, we have here a similar kind of idea of a resilient transportation corridor, really that's moving through the middle of downtown and, you know, kind of coming along Washington Street, Easy Street, access to the Steamboat Wharf, and then out, you know, towards Brant Point. Nature-based erosion management, especially here along this edge and down around the edge of the wetlands around Montmoyne. The idea again of resilient buildings and then adapted water access at a few different points here in the little red dots there. And then, and I'll get into this a bit further in just a minute, structural flood protection that is really running kind of right down through the downtown core. Here, you know, maintaining access to the area is a priority with this preliminary strategy. So to do this, as I just mentioned, you know, we're looking at raising along Holbert, Easton, and the Washington Street extension to Mariner Way. And that part of the goal of that is providing emergency access to the area, can be, you know, continuing to provide emergency access. And the idea right now, our thinking here is that it would make sense to elevate these enough to offer protection to the monthly high tide in 2070. And you can see in a minute the difference between protecting to the monthly high tide as opposed to protecting to the 2070 storm, and just the impact it has on access and on adjacent buildings. So that will, I can give you a little bit more clarification on that in just a second. In addition to, you know, one of the things, raising roadways may require encroaching on private properties and could alter private driveways and crossroad access. In addition, buildings and other infrastructure on either side of the protection will need to be adapted to withstand impacts from severe flood, and in different ways. So buildings on the coastal side obviously impacted by more regular flooding, and then buildings kind of on the inland side would be impacted by the more severe storms. So it's not, you know, in this case, it wouldn't be a full protect strategy, but would really increase the level of protection throughout downtown. And then we do again have, you know, the thinking around nature-based erosion management and slowing and reducing risk, as well as thinking about how marsh habitat may migrate and kind of be, you know, be either increased or retained at its current level through different kinds of, you know, elevating the marsh and other kinds of nature-based strategies. So again, I'm going to ask a similar question here, and this is in some ways just to understand priorities, not to say that we can only do one, but if we only were able to address one of the resilience issues in this area, love to hear from you, you know, which of those you think is most critical in downtown. Feel free to pop that in the chat or just say out loud. So we've got adapted water access is one. And roadways for emergency response. Structural flood protections. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Cecil Jensen. I you know, I've went through Envision Resilience. We've actually spent a lot of the Remain project. We've spent a lot of time thinking about this area and what priorities we should take. And I can't say it's just one. I think the health of the harbor and the resilience of the marsh area down at the end of Washington Street are absolutely critical to all of this. So I want to say that is my top priority. But on the other hand, if we can't get to the steamship and we can't drive down Washington Street, then, you know, as a community, we've really lost our lifeline. So I find it very difficult to choose just one in this case, yeah. Amy. I think, you know, a healthy harbor and a healthy living shoreline that we already have. I mean, if we could do more to expand the creeks, I think that would only benefit all of us. But I mean, what good is it if we can't get to the downtown? So that it's a conundrum.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, I would agree with those comments. And I also think we have land that's protecting that harbor right now. And if that goes, because we're not protecting using erosion nature-based solutions, even if the steamship can get there, it's not going to be able to dock because it's going to be open ocean. And, you know, we're going to have to wait for a nice day in August to get off the boat, right? So I think this is the same sort of situation we were talking about with Smith Point, is that you have to use these nature-based erosion management to try to protect what little land we have left, which in turn protects the harbors and, you know, our ability to access the island and to access the water. So it's, you know, obviously we need to have the ferry route protected, but if we don't protect the entrance to the harbor, we're going to be in trouble too.
Yeah, so the tip of Code 2 and out at the jetties, sort of Brown Point area, all of that being,
yeah,
if
that
incredibly...
goes, we're in real trouble, you know. So, and I'm not even sure that the people that are living there that think they don't have an erosion problem don't understand how fragile that sandbar is there. And that, so yeah.
Okay. So I think, you know, here, again, you know, we are calling this a protect strategy. In some ways it is a little bit both, right? Those erosion control measures are an adapt strategy, but they aid very much in the protection of some of these other pieces that are more, you know, require maybe some of the kind of harder infrastructure and protection. So it really is, they do very much work hand in hand. So I understand that it's not a simple one answer question. So just for the sake of time, thank you, Liz. I appreciate no one can choose just one. So I just want to run through this so you have an understanding of kind of what do we mean when we're talking about these sort of structural resilience strategies, and some of the impacts and trade-offs that we'll have to be thinking through. And definitely would love to hear from you on these. So what this is showing is really this kind of primary corridor that is, you know, is both creating raised elevations to protect what's behind, but also ensuring that access, you know, throughout. And so you can see we've just created a section at 3 different locations. You know, up here on Beach Street, and then a kind of really 2 on Beach Street, and then the 3rd here on Easy Street, really kind of where the park is, excuse me, that someone mentioned. You can see in different scenarios the kind of different ways in which this might, you know, we may have more or less space to work with. As I mentioned before, you know, we obviously need to get cars on and off of this. It's not just enough to have the raised roadway. So there are moments where the kind of on and off ramp may start to impact buildings adjacent. And that's where I want to zoom in to look at these a little closer. You can see here, this lower dashed line is the 2070 mean high water, and that's the elevation we're showing here. The higher line would be the 2070 1% flood. So you can see that if we were to raise these to that full protection level, it would be incredibly high and quite a kind of, quite a barrier and quite a presence in downtown. So our thinking, really is that raising to this lower level aids in the daily or more regular impact and raises, does protect against some of the earlier larger storms, but as we get into later conditions, may need to be rethought if those storms are really high or the buildings around are not able to adapt in different ways. So I think, as you can see here, there are clear, and Lisa can probably speak to this, there is a real need, we've understood from prior conversations, the need for the preservation of the heritage downtown and the ability for a strategy like this to work with the kind of, the experience of downtown. Lisa, I don't know if you want to jump in and say anything there.
I think we've kind of gotten to the point where this is the hardest nut to crack, as I think we all know. And, from a historic point of view, there are some properties you can see that are harborside that are in front of the wall. And in some respects, some of those are historic, the Macy Warehouse. Others are historic from the Beinecke era, but in a different way. So one of the things in preservation that we've talked about is the importance of understanding that we need to document all of these buildings and understand their importance and significance, and see what we can do in the case of a disaster, for example, to be able to reconstruct them, build back better if necessary. But this long-term approach on sea level rise, if we're looking at a protect approach, it is considerably different than the adapt or what we've developed for the flooding guidelines. So this will take some serious design approaches and is something that is what was previously mentioned itself will have to go through significant regulatory review. So I think it's an interim, it's a scalable strategy that we're talking about first, Amy. I would say, as you pointed out, it's something to begin the protection approach for downtown businesses and the extremely important tourism economy.
Yeah, and I think that raises maybe two questions that'd be great to get your feedback on. One is, would you be willing to accept the potential impacts of this strategy in downtown in order to protect against long-term flooding? And maybe related to that, would you rather see a higher level of protection or protection in a different location, even though it might more significantly alter the built character of downtown and the experience of the waterfront? And I'll just, while you're thinking on that, thank you, Sunny, for dropping the numbers in there. Patty, you had asked about the sea level rise. Sunny answered that in the chat, but you can see I know it's a little bit difficult, they're small, but the height of the barrier, it depends on the existing elevation, but it's roughly 5 to 6 feet moving, changing throughout in order to hit that roughly about datum of about 7. And yes, the predictions do consider storm surge as well as sea level rise. Does anyone have comments in general on the approach here, trade-offs? Yeah, Bill, looks like you've got your hand up.
Thank you. One thing when you were looking at this possible elevation scenario, the area that we're talking about, that whole section from Francis Street down around the point and everything, that's all fill land from way back. And so the question I would have is, how is that fill land going to support barriers, weights, buildups, whatever? You know, is that taken into design? It's going to sink, you know, X number of feet because it's not a solid base to begin with. It's fill. So anyway, just a question.
Yeah, and a great one, a very challenging one. It's something that we deal with throughout Massachusetts. You know, our office works in Boston a lot. We have the same challenge in, you know, parks and spaces there. It certainly will impact it, you know, most likely, you know, I imagine it certainly is requires kind of the next stage of understanding. So as we move out of planning into considering, you know, getting into more detailed proposals, the geotechnical study would have to happen to really understand what is the ground like there, what can it support, and there are methods for dealing with that, for creating those supports, but you know, it's complexity and cost that change as we better understand what's below grade. So it's absolutely a factor, and you know, we don't know enough at this point in kind of a planning study to say specifically where, you know, where that is or isn't an issue.
So Amy, have there been any discussions of something really kind of radical rather than trying to protect the grid of streets by raising them up, but reimagining how people move around this whole section of town, like protecting the road from the ferry, you know, inland a little bit, but then all these other side roads, maybe making it only pedestrian access, not auto access, relocating places that need deliveries, coming up with some kind of an emergency plan, but just sort of thinking about it instead of trying to maintain the status quo of the grid we have now in town, think about it in a different way of relocating functions as opposed to buildings or raising roads.
I'm interested to hear what others think.
Well,
you know,
if I could jump in really quickly, Susan, I encourage you to come and take a look at the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge that Remain sponsored, because the students, we had 5 different university teams involved, and they were so untethered to any of our reality that they do just what you're describing. They envisioned a brave new world in terms of design and taking everything that we have and rethinking it. And while we didn't do Envision Resilience as a way to be prescriptive to the town, and I don't think, you know, not all of the ideas are worth considering, but I think what it does is it allows us as a community to think imaginatively about what it could look like with water. So, you know, I know that Vince has seen it, and others in the town have had a chance to see some of their designs, and it's pretty compelling to see.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, and by the way, that's going to be their designs are going to be on display at the Macy Warehouse 2nd floor all summer.
Amy, I might comment on Tom's comment in the chat. If we can steer our thinking away from historic preservation as an inaction to a willingness to install protection of our historic district, maybe we can move forward. I have to say that is one of the reasons that, you know, we work so hard to make sure that the Historic Commission received guidance on how to go about doing that, how to elevate buildings, how to look at alternatives that would respect the character of the community and these individual assets, but adapt them. Because, I mean, I spend a lot of time in this topic in the other coastal communities and island communities as well, and that's what we're talking about, is we may have to make some very difficult choices, and those choices need to come from the community. They can certainly reflect the aesthetic, but some of those things are in place to protect what are really significant economic assets. And that's maybe how we look at it. And I do think that maybe some of the ideas that came out of Envision Resilience could find a way into future planning and design. So there's some good parallels going on in Nantucket right now.
Sarah, I think you had your hand up.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say to remind everyone too that part of this, the Coastal Resilience Plan is about making policy recommendations. So I think something like the Envision Resilience Nantucket program or project really helped us see some of like, sometimes it's like the far out of that scale of that distribution of like, okay, there's some really like ideas that I can't imagine us ever going for, but it helps see what's possible without being, as Cecil said, tethered to like the strict rules we have both with planning and zoning and historic district commission, and even some of the Concom. And I'm not saying that we get rid of all that, but I'm saying it helps us see maybe a path and thinking through some of those policy things. So I think that's, to me, exciting to think about is where we can, I think to Susan's point before when you're talking about Madaket, how can we streamline that process so when there's a response needed because something happens, there's sort of something in place. Like we know for hazard mitigation, there's like when there's, when a hazard happens and there's like a hurricane, there's a set of responses that happen. And if that same thing happens at an ecological level, and there's a built-in response that kind of streamlines some of the approvals, not just makes it a blanket, but kind of speeds up that process to make the eelgrass or the seagrass plantings happen, and maybe movement of sand or whatever needs to happen. So I think seeing those things come out of some of this would be great.
Great. So I know we're gonna be zoomed over back to the main the main session in less than 1 minute. I just want to say a couple of things. One is I very much appreciate the willingness, I think, to say, well, maybe we need to think more speculatively, and that what is possible. I think it's fantastic that while understanding and prioritizing emergency and key infrastructure and character, though, as Lisa said, character, it changes, right? It's not stagnant. It's about embracing, and I'm going to not say this in the way Lisa would exactly say it, but it's about embracing and not maintaining exactly. And so
I'm making enough. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I think everybody's back. We still have 80 people, which is fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us on a summer Thursday night. So I really appreciate everybody's long attention, and I hope that there were good conversations in each of the breakout groups. We just have one slide remaining in the last 3 minutes here. I want to make sure that folks have a chance to see ways that we will continue to stay involved with you. So just 1 second here. I got to find the right screen. All right. Can somebody just let me know that they can see the thank you by shaking head yes? Great. Or thumbs up. Thank you. So again, thanks to everybody. To continue the conversation, would definitely encourage you, you can use the QR code here to download the IRIS app. There will be further posting here of follow-up surveys, as well as opportunities for you to download pictures and ideas that you have that might occur to you later tonight that you didn't get a chance to relay today. We'd love to collect them through the app. Of course, our team is always available to answer further questions by email or otherwise. A couple of follow-up steps. We will be developing a summary of the discussions from tonight. So we will download everything, process it, and provide kind of a summary of the overall discussion by each area. I know folks are probably really curious about what was discussed in each of the areas. So we'll give an opportunity to summarize that for folks' benefit. And then keep an eye out for additional public meetings. We'll be talking to the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee a couple more times, at least through the course of this project as we refine these ideas. And so those will be opportunities for you all to continue to learn about and hear what we're working on. And finally, the